Human history feels solid when it is written down. Dates, names, borders, inventions. Yet the longer we look, the more fragile that solidity becomes. Writing fades. Monuments collapse. Records thin out until history turns into soil, sediment, and silence. What remains is not a clear beginning, but layers, each one shaped by lives that came before, most of them unnamed. This documentary is not about lost empires or hidden machines. It is about inheritance, about how Earth itself may carry the consequences of civilizations long gone, even when their memory has vanished. We will move slowly through deep time, climate shifts, collapses, and quiet survivals. Not to prove what came before, but to understand how little of the past is ever allowed to remain visible. If humanity did inherit this planet, the inheritance would not announce itself. It would already be under our feet. The silence before the first record. The oldest written records describe a world already in motion. They do not begin with origins. They begin with administration, lists of grain, tallies of labor, boundaries of land. In Mesopotamia, the earliest cuneiform tablets from Uruk, dated to around 3300 BCE, record shipments of barley and beer. They do not explain how cities formed. They assume cities already exist. Writing appears late in the story, not at the beginning. By the time symbols are pressed into clay, systems are already mature. Archaeology often treats this as normal. Humans develop slowly, tools improve, villages grow, writing emerges. Yet the timeline is uneven. There are long stretches of apparent stasis, followed by sudden complexity. In several regions, monumental building appears without clear local precursors. Stone architecture arrives fully formed. Social hierarchies solidify quickly. Techniques seem to arrive as packages rather than inventions. The question of inheritance begins here, not as a claim of advanced machines or lost empires, but as a problem of continuity. Human history, as recorded, does not begin at zero. It begins midstream. Something came before, then stopped, leaving gaps rather than ruin. Geology confirms that Earth regularly erases its surface. Plate tectonics recycle crust. Glaciers grind cities into powder. Rising seas swallow coastlines. Sediment layers bury landscapes. What survives is uneven. Stone endures, wood decays, metal corrodes, concrete fractures. After enough time, even advanced societies would leave only scattered traces, difficult to recognize without context. In 1992, researchers drilling ice cores in Greenland published data showing abrupt climate shifts. Temperatures rose and fell by several degrees within decades. These events occurred repeatedly over the last 100,000 years. One of the most severe was the Younger Dryas, beginning around 12,900 years ago. A warming world snapped back into near-glacial conditions. Forests retreated, ice advanced, sea levels dropped, human populations fragmented. If a complex society had existed before this period, its infrastructure would have faced collapse. Agriculture would fail. Trade routes would break. Coastal cities would be exposed or submerged as seas shifted again after the cold period ended. Over centuries, memory would fade. Survivors would adapt to new conditions using fragments of prior knowledge. Archaeological layers from this era show disruption. At sites like Göbekli Tepe in southeastern Turkey, massive stone enclosures were built by hunter-gatherers around 9,600 BCE. The stones weigh up to 20 tons. They are carved with animals, abstract symbols, and reliefs of unknown meaning. There is no evidence of agriculture at the site when construction began. No villages nearby. No gradual architectural evolution. The structures were later deliberately buried. Excavator Klaus Schmidt described Göbekli Tepe as a sanctuary, built before the Neolithic Revolution. Its builders organized labor, transported stone, and planned complex layouts without settled farming. This reverses the standard sequence of development. Monumental architecture appears before agriculture, not after. The site does not stand alone. Similar early stoneworks appear across the Fertile Crescent. At Jericho, a stone tower was built around 8000 BCE, standing over 8 meters tall, with an internal staircase. Its purpose remains debated. Defensive explanations are weak. The surrounding wall predates known warfare. Symbolic or ritual functions are suggested, but evidence is sparse. These structures do not prove a lost civilization. They do suggest inherited practices, knowledge of stone shaping, knowledge of geometry, knowledge of organizing labor at scale. Such knowledge does not require writing, but it does require tradition. It must be taught. Across the globe, similar patterns appear. In South America, the site of Carol in Peru dates to around 2600 BCE. Large platform mounds, sunken plazas, and complex urban planning existed without pottery or writing. The society appears suddenly in the archaeological record, already structured. In Egypt, the earliest dynasties show advanced stonework from the start. The step pyramid of Djoser, built around 2670 BCE, appears as a fully realized architectural experiment. Imhotep's design uses stacked mastabas, precise alignment, and fine limestone casing. There is no clear trail of failed prototypes. Earlier structures are simpler, but the leap is sharp. Even more striking are the precision stone works at Giza. The core blocks of the Great Pyramid are massive. The casing stones, now mostly gone, were fitted with joints measured in fractions of a millimeter. This level of precision is difficult to achieve even with modern tools. Egyptologists explain it through lost techniques and skilled labor. The explanation may be correct. It still implies knowledge that appears abruptly. If knowledge can be lost, it can also be inherited imperfectly. A later culture may preserve the result without fully understanding the method. Stone tools might replace metal. Ritual explanations might replace technical ones. Over generations, function becomes myth. Ancient texts sometimes hint at this process. In Plato's dialogues, especially the Timaeus and Critias, Egyptian priests tell Solon that Greek history has been repeatedly erased by floods and fires. They claim that only Egypt preserved records through stable geography. The story of Atlantis is framed not as fantasy, but as an account from earlier cycles of destruction. Plato places Atlantis around 9,000 years before his time. The date aligns roughly with the end of the last ice age. While the story is often dismissed, its structure reflects a belief common in the ancient world. Civilization is not linear. It rises and falls. Similar ideas appear in Indian cosmology. The concept of yugas describes repeating ages of creation and collapse. In Mesoamerica, calendars reset after great cycles. These are not scientific records. They are cultural memories of discontinuity. Modern archaeology is cautious with such interpretations. Myth is not evidence, yet myths often preserve real events in distorted form. Flood stories appear in Mesopotamia, India, China, and the Americas. They differ in detail but share a core theme: a world destroyed by water, followed by renewal. The geological record confirms massive flooding events. Meltwater pulses at the end of the Ice Age raised sea levels rapidly. Coastal plains vanished. River systems reorganized. The Black Sea may have flooded catastrophically around 5,600 BCE, as suggested by William Ryan and Walter Pittman. Settlements along its shores would have been displaced or destroyed. If a prior civilization existed primarily along coasts, as many do, its remains would now lie underwater. Marine archaeology has explored only a small fraction of continental shelves. What has been found so far includes submerged villages, stone tools and walls, but no cities. Absence of evidence remains inconclusive. Another challenge is recognition. Archaeology looks for familiar markers: pottery, metallurgy, writing. A society organized differently might leave traces that are misinterpreted as natural formations or ritual sites: stone circles, mounds, modified landscapes. Without context, intention is hard to prove. The idea of inheritance does not require advanced technology. It requires time, tens of thousands of years, multiple collapses, partial recoveries. Each cycle strips complexity. Each restart begins with fewer tools and less memory. Over enough cycles, only habits remain. Consider fire use, stone knapping, shelter building. These skills persist across deep time. Others vanish. Lime concrete was used by the Romans, then lost for centuries. Greek fire disappeared. Antikythera's mechanism, discovered in a shipwreck and dated to around 100 BCE, demonstrates complex gear systems not seen again until medieval clocks. Its existence was unknown until 1901. Inheritance can be selective. A society may retain astronomy but lose engineering, or retain geometry but lose writing. What survives depends on environment and necessity. Humanity's relationship with Earth reflects this pattern. Agriculture appears independently in multiple regions shortly after the Ice Age. This suggests either convergence or diffusion from earlier knowledge pools. The speed of adoption hints at readiness rather than invention. By 3000 BCE, cities exist across Eurasia and Africa. By 2000 BCE, long-distance trade connects continents. Tin from Central Asia reaches the Mediterranean. Amber travels south. Knowledge moves faster than populations. The silence before the first record remains unresolved. Writing did not capture the beginning, it captured the restart. The earliest scribes wrote as inheritors, not founders. They recorded what functioned, not what was lost. If humanity inherited Earth from a previous civilization, the inheritance would not be obvious. It would be incomplete, fragmented, embedded in stone alignments, myths, and unexplained skills. It would look like coincidence. It would feel ordinary. The planet itself would be the archive. Its layers would tell stories without names. Its surfaces would erase more than they preserve. Each generation would believe it stands at the beginning. Archaeology continues to fill gaps, but it works within timeframes defined by surviving material. Anything erased beyond recognition becomes prehistory, then geology. The possibility of inheritance remains a question, not a claim. It sits at the boundary between what is known and what cannot be tested. It does not demand belief, it asks restraint. Human history begins where memory allows. What lies before that remains quiet, shaped by stone, water, and time. Earth as an eraser. The surface of the planet is not stable. It only appears so within a human lifetime. Over longer spans, the ground moves, sinks, fractures, and is replaced. Mountains rise and collapse. Coastlines migrate. Rivers abandon their channels. What remains visible at any given moment is temporary. Geology treats Earth as a system of renewal through destruction. The crust is recycled through plate tectonics. Ocean floors are created at ridges and consumed at subduction zones. Continental crust survives longer, but it is reshaped continuously. Erosion removes material grain by grain. Deposition buries what remains. Over thousands of years, landscapes forget. Civilizations depend on surfaces. Roads, buildings, farms, and cities exist only where the crust is exposed. Once buried or submerged, they are removed from daily experience. Over time, they stop being recognized as artificial. Stone becomes rock again. Walls become ridges. foundations become anomalies without context. One of the most powerful erasers is water. Rivers transport sediment from uplands to basins. Floodplains accumulate layers year after year. In the Yellow River Basin, sedimentation rates are among the highest on Earth. Ancient settlements have been buried under meters of silt. Entire cities lie below modern ground level, stacked like pages. The Tigris and Euphrates behave similarly. Archaeological excavations at sites such as and Lagash reveal repeated flood layers separating occupation phases. These layers are sterile, no tools, no debris, just compacted mud. Each flood resets the surface. What was once a city becomes subsoil. Coastal regions face a different erasure. Sea levels have risen more than 100 meters since the last glacial maximum around 20,000 years ago. Vast areas of continental shelf were once dry land. These areas hosted rivers, plains, and likely settlements. As ice melted, shorelines retreated inland. Anything built near the coast was submerged. Modern coastlines are not ancient boundaries. The North Sea covered Doggerland, a large landmass connecting Britain to Europe. Archaeologists have recovered stone tools and animal bones from the sea floor. No cities have been found, but exploration is limited. Visibility is poor. Sediment is thick. Ice acts as both eraser and preserver. Glaciers grind surfaces beneath them, removing soil, vegetation, and structures. When they retreat, they leave scoured rock. Any prior occupation is erased. Yet ice can also preserve what it entombs. Organic material trapped in permafrost can survive for tens of thousands of years. During glacial periods, human populations are forced south or into refugia. Infrastructure collapses. After ice retreats, recolonization occurs on a clean surface. The absence of ruins does not imply absence of occupation. It implies removal. Volcanism resets landscapes instantly. Ash falls bury cities. Lava flows cover terrain. The eruption of Thera around 1600 BCE buried parts of the Aegean in meters of ash. Akrotiri was preserved because of rapid burial. Without excavation, it would appear as a hill. Older eruptions were larger. The Toba eruption, around 74,000 years ago, spread ash across much of South Asia. It may have caused a volcanic winter. Whatever existed near the eruption was destroyed. Ash layers are found in sediment cores, marking a line of interruption. Deserts erase differently. Wind transports sand, abrading surfaces and burying structures. In the Sahara, ancient river systems once supported grasslands and lakes. Rock art shows animals no longer present. Settlements existed during wetter periods. As aridity increased, sand advanced. Many sites remain undiscovered beneath dunes. Time adds another layer of removal. Materials decay at different rates. Wood disappears quickly. Iron rusts. Copper corrodes. Stone lasts longest, but even stone fractures under thermal stress and chemical weathering. Limestone dissolves in acidic rain. Granite exfoliates. If a civilization relied heavily on organic materials, its trace would be minimal. Roads of packed earth vanish. Buildings of wood leave stains at best. Even fired brick erodes, unless protected. Only specific conditions allow preservation. Recognition is another limitation. Archaeology depends on pattern recognition, regular shapes, tool marks, cultural debris. A structure without familiar markers may be dismissed as natural. Until recently, many stone circles were ignored. Some megalithic sites were mistaken for glacial deposits. In 1977, satellite imagery revealed long, straight features in the Amazon rainforest. These were later identified as earthworks dating back over 1,000 years. They were invisible from the ground due to vegetation. Without modern tools, they remained unknown. This suggests a bias toward visibility. What cannot be easily seen is not studied. What is not studied is assumed absent. Earth does not preserve history evenly. It selects. It favors certain climates, materials, and chance events. What survives shapes the narrative. What is lost creates silence. If humanity inherited Earth from an earlier civilization, that inheritance would be filtered through these processes. Most evidence would be gone. What remained would be ambiguous. A stone alignment here, an unexplained layer there, an object out of place. The eraser does not work all at once. It works continuously. Every year removes a little more. Every flood, fire, or quake edits the surface. Over deep time, even the largest works become dust. What survives does so not because it was important, but because conditions allowed it. History is written by preservation as much as by action. The absence of proof does not resolve the question. It defines its limits. Earth keeps its own record, but it does not organize it for human reading. Fragments without context. Archaeology depends on sequence. Tools are expected to evolve from simpler forms. Materials are expected to appear in a known order. Stone precedes copper. Copper precedes bronze. Bronze precedes iron. Writing follows settlement. Cities follow agriculture. When objects appear outside this sequence, they are labeled anomalous or reinterpreted to fit expectation. Across the archaeological record, there are fragments that resist placement. They are isolated. They lack ancestors and descendants. They appear once, then vanish. These fragments are usually explained as local innovations or experimental dead ends. Sometimes that explanation holds. Sometimes the context remains incomplete. One of the most discussed examples is the Antikythera mechanism. Recovered in 1901 from a shipwreck off the Greek island of Antikythera, the device dates to around 100 BCE. It consists of interlocking bronze gears housed in a wooden case. Modern analysis shows it was capable of predicting eclipses, planetary motions, and Olympic cycles. Its complexity rivals that of medieval astronomical clocks built more than 1,000 years later. No similar devices are known from the ancient world. No workshop remains, no instructional texts, no clear lineage. Ancient authors mention geared devices, but only in vague terms. Cicero described a sphere made by Archimedes that modelled the heavens. The object itself is lost. The mechanism exists as a fragment of capability without context. It demonstrates that advanced mechanical knowledge existed, but not how widespread it was. When Rome fell, this knowledge disappeared from the record. Europe would not see comparable gear systems again until the 14th century. Stone construction offers similar cases. At sites such as Pumapunku in Bolivia, stone blocks are cut with flat surfaces, sharp angles, and precise holes. The stones weigh several tons. The joints fit tightly without mortar. The site dates to the Tiwanaku culture, flourishing around 500 to 1000 CE. The precision exceeds that seen in later local architecture. There are no clear intermediate examples showing gradual improvement. The techniques appear fully formed. After the site was abandoned, the methods were not continued. Later cultures in the region did not replicate the same precision. In Egypt, core drilling marks, found in granite blocks at Giza, show circular grooves, consistent with tubular drilling. The depth and spacing of the grooves suggest rapid material removal. Egyptologists explain this using copper tools and abrasive sand. Experimental archaeology has replicated some results, but debates remain over efficiency and scale. What matters is not whether the methods are explainable, but that the explanations rely on reconstructed techniques rather than documented ones. The builders left no manuals. The knowledge existed in practice, not in text. When the builders disappeared, the practice ended. In South Asia, the city of Mohenjo-Daro shows advanced urban planning around 2500 BCE. Streets are laid out in grids. Houses have private wells and bathrooms. A complex drainage system runs beneath the streets, using standardized brick sizes. After the Indus Valley civilization declined, such urban sanitation would not reappear in the region for millennia. The reasons for the decline remain debated. Climate change, river shifts, and trade disruption are suggested. What is clear is that the knowledge of urban water management did not transfer smoothly to later societies in the area. The fragment exists without continuity. Metallurgy provides another pattern. Iron objects appear sporadically before the Iron Age. In Anatolia, iron artifacts dating to 2000 BCE exist, centuries before iron became common. These objects are rare and often ceremonial. The smelting techniques required to produce workable iron are complex. Their early appearance suggests experimentation or inherited knowledge that was not yet scalable. Glassmaking follows a similar trajectory. High-quality glass appears in Mesopotamia and Egypt around 1500 BCE. Recipes were guarded secrets. When trade networks collapsed, glass production declined. Some techniques were lost and later rediscovered. Even mathematics shows fragmentation. Babylonian tablets reveal sophisticated algebra and geometry around 1800 BCE. They include solutions to quadratic equations and approximations of square roots. Greek mathematics developed independently with different methods. After the fall of the Western Roman Empire, much of this knowledge disappeared from Europe, preserved instead in Islamic centers. Fragments survive because they are embedded in durable media. Clay tablets endure, stone blocks endure, metal corrodes, but sometimes persists. What does not endure is the system that produced them. Context requires continuity. It requires multiple examples across time. When a society collapses, continuity breaks. What remains are isolated artifacts, detached from their learning environments. The inheritance question emerges again. If humanity inherited Earth from a previous civilization, most of that inheritance would not appear as a complete archive. It would appear as fragments. Tools without manuals, structures without blueprints, knowledge practiced but not written. Later societies would reuse what they found. Stones would be repurposed, sites would be rebuilt, meanings would shift. A technical object might become ritual, a functional alignment might become symbolic. Over time, interpretation replaces function. Myths grow around what cannot be explained. Precision becomes sacred. Utility becomes legend. Archaeology works to reduce mystery, but it is constrained by what survives. Fragments without context remain unresolved, not because they are extraordinary, but because their environments are gone. Each fragment marks a boundary. On one side is what can be traced. On the other is silence. The record does not deny inheritance. It shows interruption, knowledge without memory. Human knowledge does not move as a single body. It fractures. Some parts survive intact. Others lose explanation while retaining use. A skill can persist long after its origin is forgotten. When this happens, knowledge becomes habit rather than understanding. Anthropology documents many examples of this process. In isolated communities, complex techniques are performed accurately without theoretical awareness. A tool is used because it works, not because its principles are known. The method is taught through repetition. Explanation is unnecessary. Over generations, reasoning disappears, but outcome remains. Navigation offers a clear case. Polynesian wayfinding relied on stars, wave patterns, bird behavior, and memory. Navigators crossed thousands of kilometers of open ocean without instruments. They did not describe their practice in mathematical terms. The knowledge existed in songs, gestures, and apprenticeship. When colonization disrupted these traditions, the knowledge nearly vanished. Only fragments survived in oral memory. Architecture preserves similar patterns. Medieval cathedrals were built using rules of proportion rather than calculations. Master builders relied on geometry encoded in diagrams and tradition. Many could not read Latin texts. They did not write treatises. When guild systems collapsed, certain techniques were lost, even though the structures remained. Ritual often becomes a container for lost function. In Japan, the Eisgran shrine is rebuilt every 20 years using ancient methods. The ritual ensures continuity of technique without written plans. The builders do not claim innovation. They repeat what was inherited. The reason for the cycle is explained spiritually, but its practical effect is preservation of craft. Cargo cults provide a modern illustration of knowledge without memory. During World War II, remote Pacific islands saw aircraft land with supplies. After the war, the planes stopped coming. Some islanders built symbolic airstrips and wooden radios, performing rituals meant to summon cargo. They reproduced visible actions without understanding logistics or technology. The function was misinterpreted, but behavior persisted. This pattern scales upward. A society can inherit tools, structures, or practices without grasping their original purpose. Over time, use shifts, meaning changes. What was once technical becomes ceremonial. Astronomy shows this transition clearly. Ancient monuments align with solstices and equinoxes. Stonehenge, Newgrange, and Maeshowe all demonstrate precise solar or lunar orientation. The builders understood cycles of light and shadow. Later cultures preserved the sites, but often reinterpreted them. Alignments became sacred markers rather than observational instruments. Calendars persist even when their astronomical basis fades. The Roman calendar retained irregular months long after their original lunar logic was obsolete. Reform required deliberate intervention. Until then, tradition overrode coherence. Writing itself can lose meaning. Linear A, used by the Minoans, remains undeciphered. The script was clearly functional. It recorded transactions. When the culture collapsed around 1450 BCE, the knowledge of reading it disappeared. The symbols remain, but the language is silent. Technologies can survive as isolated practices. Roman concrete used volcanic ash to create durable structures. The recipe was not preserved in detail. After the Roman Empire declined, the technique was lost. Builders reused ruins, but could not replicate the material. Only in recent decades has its composition been understood. Medicine offers further examples. Herbal remedies are used across cultures with proven efficacy. Often the biochemical mechanism is unknown to the practitioner. The knowledge persists through trial, observation, and inheritance. When disrupted, it can vanish quickly. If a prior civilization existed, its knowledge would not transfer cleanly. Survivors would retain what they could practice. They would lose what required infrastructure, resources, or abstract theory. Over generations, explanation would thin. What remained would be skill without context. This process does not require catastrophe alone. Gradual decline achieves the same result. Trade routes falter, education narrows, specialization disappears. General survival replaces complex coordination. In such conditions, memory contracts. Myth emerges as a substitute. Stories encode fragments of knowledge in narrative form. Flood myths preserve memory of rising waters. Fire myths encode knowledge of volcanic danger. Sky gods reflect astronomical observation. Over time, literal meaning overtakes practical origin. Ritual stabilizes behavior. It fixes actions in sequence. It discourages deviation. This ensures consistency but resists innovation. When the reason for the ritual is forgotten, change becomes taboo. Archaeology encounters this outcome repeatedly. A tool is found that works, but no workshop is known. A structure stands, but no quarry is identified. A method is implied, but no instructions exist. The absence of explanation is not evidence of absence. It is evidence of loss. Inheritance without memory produces a specific signature. High competence paired with low documentation. Precision without theory. Repetition without variation. When these appear, they suggest transmission through practice rather than understanding. Human history is filled with such moments. Each represents a narrowing of knowledge. Each marks a boundary between what was known and what is remembered. If Earth was inherited, this is how it would appear. Not as a continuous archive, but as a landscape of practices outliving their explanations. The ground would hold the results. The reasons would be gone. Reused worlds. Civilizations rarely begin on empty ground. They settle where water flows, where soil holds seed, where stone is accessible, and where climate allows continuity. These conditions do not change quickly. As a result, the same locations are chosen again and again across deep time. What appears as continuity is often reuse. Archaeology reveals this pattern through stratification. One settlement sits atop another. Walls become foundations. Streets become buried channels. At sites like Troy, 9 major occupation layers span thousands of years. Each city reused the ground of the last. The ruins below shaped the city above, even when the builders no longer knew who came before. This reuse is practical. Clearing a site requires effort. Existing mounds provide elevation against floods. Old walls offer ready stone. Ruins mark places already proven livable. A collapsed city is not a warning. It is an invitation. In Mesopotamia, this process created tells. These artificial hills are composed of mud brick debris accumulated over centuries. Each generation rebuilt on top of the previous one. The ground rose steadily. When archaeologists excavate tells, they dig downward through time. Upper layers show later cultures. Lower layers show earlier ones. Eventually, the sequence ends, not because occupation began, but because erosion or water removed what came before. The same pattern appears in Egypt. Temples were rebuilt repeatedly on the same sacred ground. The Temple of Karnak grew over 2,000 years. Each pharaoh added halls, pylons, or obelisks. Earlier structures were dismantled or incorporated. Stone blocks were reused, sometimes upside down, sometimes recarved. Inscriptions from different eras appear within the same wall. This reuse blurs origin. When a later culture inherits a site, it also inherits its orientation, its symbolism, and its constraints. Roads follow older paths. Property lines persist. Sacred directions remain fixed. What appears as intentional alignment may be inherited geometry. Rome provides a clear example. Medieval buildings reused Roman foundations. Columns from pagan temples were embedded in churches. Marble was burned for lime. Aqueducts were repaired, repurposed, or abandoned. The city survived not by preserving Rome, but by consuming it. In some cases, reuse preserves function without understanding. Roman roads were built with layered foundations designed for drainage and durability. Medieval travelers used them without knowing their construction logic. When repairs failed, the reason was forgotten. The road remained until it decayed beyond use. Water systems show similar inheritance. In the Indus Valley, drainage networks beneath cities like Harappa were carefully engineered. Later, settlements reused parts of these systems, even as maintenance knowledge declined. Eventually, the drains clogged. Flooding increased. The city was abandoned. In Central America, Maya cities were built atop earlier platforms. Temples were expanded vertically. New structures encased old ones. When a city declined, vegetation reclaimed it. Centuries later, new populations settled nearby, unaware of what lay beneath the forest floor. Reuse is not always deliberate. Sometimes it is unconscious. Agriculture alters soil composition. Irrigation salinizes land. Deforestation changes rainfall patterns. Later societies inherit these altered environments without knowing the cause. They respond to symptoms, not origins. The collapse of Sumerian city-states around 2200 BCE coincides with soil salinization caused by long-term irrigation. Crops failed, populations shifted north, later cultures inherited degraded land. The memory of its cause was lost. The land itself carried the consequence. Terracing offers another example. In the Andes, agricultural terraces stabilized slopes and managed water. Some were built thousands of years ago. Later, farmers reused them, repairing walls without knowing who first designed them. When terraces fell into disrepair, erosion returned. The knowledge was embedded in stone, not text. This pattern suggests that landscapes themselves are technologies. They are modified, optimized, and maintained. When maintenance stops, failure follows. Later societies may inherit the structure without inheriting the maintenance logic. If humanity inherited Earth from a previous civilization, reuse would be the primary mode of transmission. Not direct instruction, but altered terrain. Rivers redirected, forests cleared, species domesticated or driven extinct, soils enriched or depleted. These changes persist long after memory fades. The planet bears scars of prior activity. Some are recognized, others are naturalized. A field looks like a field. A hill looks like a hill. Only careful study reveals artificial origin. Even then, interpretation depends on expectation. Modern examples show how quickly context disappears. Abandoned industrial sites become ruins within decades. Their purpose becomes obscure. Machinery rusts. Buildings collapse. Within a century, interpretation requires archives. Without them, function is guessed. Multiply this process over millennia, over ice ages, over sea level changes, over tectonic shifts. The result is a world shaped by layers of use and abandonment. Reuse also affects knowledge. A later society may attribute structures to gods or ancestors. Sacred status replaces practical origin. Prohibition replaces inquiry. This stabilizes use but blocks understanding. Stone tools found near ancient sites may be assumed primitive because of their material, not their context. A society might deliberately choose stone over metal for ritual or durability. Material alone does not define advancement. Inheritance without awareness creates false beginnings. Each culture believes it is first. Each interprets the ground as given, not modified. The deeper history remains buried. Archaeology attempts to peel back layers, but it is limited by access and preservation. Excavation destroys as it reveals. Interpretation relies on surviving patterns. Reuse blurs those patterns. The reused world does not announce itself. It functions quietly. It shapes behavior without explanation. It carries forward decisions made by forgotten hands. If Earth was inherited, this is how the inheritance would operate, not through monuments labeled as legacy, but through landscapes already changed, through soils that behave differently, through coastlines that no longer match rivers, through cities built where cities always stood. The past does not need to be remembered to exert influence. It only needs to have acted. Cycles of collapse. Human societies do not end in a single way. Some fall quickly. Others thin out over centuries. What unites them is not violence or disaster alone, but the slow failure of systems that once held daily life together. Collapse is rarely sudden from within. It is gradual, uneven, and often invisible while it is happening. Archaeology shows that complex societies depend on balance. Food production must meet population needs. Water systems must remain stable. Trade must continue, authority must be accepted. When several of these weaken at once, resilience drops. A society may persist for generations under strain, but its structure becomes brittle. The Akkadian Empire offers a clear example. Around 2200 BCE, it controlled much of Mesopotamia through centralized administration and long-distance trade. Then climate records show a sharp aridification event. Rainfall decreased, crop yields fell. Texts from the period describe famine and abandonment. Cities were left behind. The empire fragmented into smaller polities. Administration collapsed before population vanished. This pattern repeats. The Old Kingdom of Egypt declined after prolonged droughts, weakened Nile floods. Central authority faltered. Regional governors gained power. Monumental construction stopped. Egypt did not disappear. It reorganized at a lower level of complexity. The Indus Valley civilization followed a similar trajectory. Urban centers declined around 1900 BCE. Large cities were abandoned. Populations dispersed into villages. Writing ceased. Standardized weights and bricks disappeared. Yet people remained. Culture continued in altered form. Collapse reduces scale. It does not erase humanity. Skills tied to specialization vanish first. Writing requires scribes, schools, and surplus. When surplus disappears, literacy contracts. Architecture simplifies. Long-distance trade shrinks. Local knowledge survives longer than global systems. Environmental stress often triggers collapse, but it is rarely the only cause. Drought exposes weaknesses already present. Overuse of land reduces flexibility. Political rigidity prevents adaptation. Collapse occurs when response fails. The Late Bronze Age collapse around 1200 BCE affected much of the eastern Mediterranean. Major powers including the Hittites and Mycenaeans fell within decades. Trade networks disintegrated. Cities burned. Writing systems vanished in some regions. The causes remain debated. Climate shifts, earthquakes, invasions, and internal unrest likely combined. What matters is the outcome. After the collapse, centuries passed before complexity returned. Greece entered a period without writing. Knowledge survived orally. Pottery styles changed. Settlement sizes shrank. When writing returned, it was different. Mesoamerica shows cycles as well. Maya city-states flourished, then declined. Southern lowland cities were abandoned around the 9th century CE. Evidence points to drought, deforestation, and social conflict. The Maya did not vanish. Northern cities persisted. Culture adapted. These cycles demonstrate a pattern. Complexity is costly. It requires constant input. When conditions change, complexity is shed. Societies revert to forms that can be maintained. If collapse happens repeatedly across deep time, continuity fragments. Each recovery builds on what remains, not on what existed before. Over multiple cycles, memory thins. This process does not require a global catastrophe. Regional collapses occurring at different times achieve the same effect. Knowledge pools become isolated. Innovations are lost locally, even if they survive elsewhere. Consider metallurgy. Bronze requires tin, which is rare. When trade routes fail, bronze production stops. Iron may replace it if locally available. The change appears as technological progress, but it is driven by constraint, not advancement. Writing systems also show this. Linear B survived because Mycenaean bureaucracy required it. When that system collapsed, writing disappeared. Alphabetic writing later emerged independently. The earlier system was not inherited, it was replaced. Each collapse acts as a filter. Only certain practices pass through. Others are lost regardless of their value. Survival favors simplicity, flexibility, and local resource use. Over thousands of years, this filtering creates gaps. A society may rediscover techniques long after losing them. Agriculture was reinvented independently in multiple regions. This suggests that conditions, not continuity, drive development. If a previous civilization existed, repeated collapses would fragment its legacy. Some elements might persist as habits, others would vanish entirely. What survived would be mistaken for local invention. Climate records indicate that such collapses are not rare. Ice cores and sediment layers show repeated abrupt changes. Periods of stability are interrupted by rapid shifts. Human societies respond by contracting, migrating, or reorganizing. Sea level rise alone reshaped coastlines repeatedly. Each rise forced retreat. Coastal infrastructure would be abandoned, inland adaptation followed. Over time, coastal knowledge would be lost. The Younger Dryas represents one such disruption. A warming world reversed into cold conditions for over a millennium. Populations adapted or moved. When warming resumed, societies rebuilt under new conditions. These transitions break continuity. They reset development paths. They make inheritance partial. Collapse also affects interpretation. Later societies may find ruins without knowing their cause. They may attribute them to myth or legend. Without written memory, explanation becomes symbolic. The Roman Empire's fall illustrates this at a smaller scale. Aqueducts stopped functioning, roads deteriorated, urban populations declined. Medieval Europe inherited ruins it could not maintain. The memory of how systems worked was incomplete. Multiply this process across prehistory. Multiply it across ice ages. The result is a patchwork record. Cycles of collapse do not prove a lost civilization. They explain how one could vanish without trace. They show how complexity can be temporary, and how its disappearance can be mistaken for absence. Human history, as recorded, is a series of recoveries. Each recovery begins with less than before. Each rebuild uses what remains. Over time, the starting point shifts. If Earth was inherited, it was inherited after many such cycles. What remained was not a blueprint, but a landscape shaped by past attempts. The memory of origin would not survive repeated collapse. Only the consequences would. The limits of detection. Modern science depends on instruments, models, and inherited assumptions. These tools extend human perception far beyond natural senses, yet they also define strict boundaries around what can be identified as evidence. Observation is never neutral. Data must fit within an existing framework before it is interpreted as meaningful. Anything that does not conform risks being set aside, explained away, or never recognized at all. Archaeology operates within especially narrow limits. Excavation is slow, costly, and irreversible. Every dig permanently alters a site, which means only a small fraction of potential locations are ever explored. Across the planet, most land has never been systematically surveyed. Dense forests, deserts, tundra, and politically restricted regions remain largely untouched. Even in regions considered well-studied, excavation tends to focus on places already assumed to be important. Sites that do not attract attention remain invisible, not because they lack evidence, but because they are never searched for. Detection strongly favors what is obvious. Stone walls, fired pottery, carved tools, and human bones are easy to classify. They resemble known categories. Altered soils, reshaped hills, redirected waterways, or engineered ecosystems are far harder to identify. These changes often resemble natural processes. A landscape modified thousands of years ago may now appear entirely ordinary. Without sharp boundaries or recognizable artifacts, intention cannot be demonstrated. Remote sensing technologies have expanded visibility, but not certainty. Satellite imagery reveals linear features, geometric outlines, and subsurface disturbances. LiDAR exposes structures hidden beneath forest canopies. Yet interpretation remains ambiguous. Nature produces straight lines through faulting, erosion, and crystal growth. Rivers create curves that mimic design. Without supporting material, patterns alone cannot confirm human activity. Ground-penetrating radar can identify voids and density differences beneath the surface, but it does not explain them. An anomaly might represent a burial chamber, a natural cave, or a collapsed geological pocket. Determining purpose requires excavation, and excavation is selective. Countless subsurface features are mapped, catalogued, and left untouched, their origins unresolved. Time steadily erodes signal clarity. Organic materials decay first. Wood rots, fibers break down, bone dissolves in acidic soil, metals corrode, fragment, and disperse into surrounding sediment. Plastics, once thought nearly indestructible, degrade under heat, pressure, and microbial action. After enough time, even advanced materials lose identifiable form. What remains may no longer resemble tools or structures at all. It may appear as contamination, background noise, or chemical anomaly. Chemical traces persist longer, but interpretation becomes increasingly uncertain. Elevated concentrations of metals in soil can indicate mining or manufacturing, but they can also reflect natural mineral deposits. Without associated artifacts, conclusions remain speculative. Context determines meaning, and context is often missing. Radiocarbon dating introduces additional constraints. It requires organic matter. Stone structures without organic residue cannot be dated directly. Archaeologists rely on surrounding material, which may have been disturbed by erosion, burrowing animals, or later construction. A stone foundation might be far older than nearby organic remains, yet the dating record cannot confirm this conclusively. Underlying all interpretation are assumptions about how human history is expected to unfold. Agriculture is presumed to precede cities. Cities are assumed to precede writing. Writing is expected before advanced science or engineering. When evidence challenges this sequence, alternative explanations are usually preferred. Anomalies are reclassified as symbolic, ritualistic, or accidental, rather than allowed to disrupt the established order. This approach is not driven by arrogance or dismissal. It reflects methodological caution. Extraordinary claims demand extraordinary evidence. Yet this standard also restricts recognition of unfamiliar patterns. What lacks precedent is hardest to interpret. Evidence that does not resemble known development paths may be overlooked, not because it is weak, but because it is unexpected. Detection also depends on survival thresholds. A civilization similar to the modern one would generate immense quantities of material waste. Yet over deep time, waste disperses. Wind, water, pressure, and heat break it down. Metals oxidize and migrate through soil. Concrete fractures and dissolves. After hundreds of thousands of years, little remains concentrated or recognizable. Only trace elements persist, scattered and diluted. Geological recycling accelerates this loss. Oceanic crust is continually destroyed at subduction zones. Any civilization built on oceanic plates would be erased entirely within a few 100 million years. Continental crust lasts longer, but it is not static. Tectonic uplift folds layers. Faulting displaces strata. What was once horizontal becomes vertical. Recognition of human modification becomes increasingly difficult as layers deform. Ice sheets represent one of the most complete erasers. During glacial periods, thick ice scours the surface, removing soil, vegetation, and structures. When ice retreats, it leaves bare rock and fresh sediment. Northern Europe and North America were repeatedly glaciated. Any surface civilization that existed there before the last glacial maximum would be nearly impossible to detect today. Scale further limits detection. archaeology focuses on discrete sites, settlements, burials, workshops. A civilization that emphasized landscape modification over monumental architecture would leave diffuse evidence. Altered hydrology, managed forests, controlled burns, or engineered soils would register as environmental variation rather than cultural activity. These signals are easy to misattribute to climate or natural processes. Biological evidence faces similar challenges. Domestication alters genetics in plants and animals. These changes can persist for millennia, yet identifying their origin requires comparison. If an earlier domestication episode occurred and was later lost, subsequent domestication could overwrite genetic signals. Population bottlenecks erase diversity. What appears as a first event may actually be a second or third. Technological detection is shaped by intent. Instruments are designed to locate expected targets. Sonar searches for ship-shaped outlines. Magnetometers detect metal concentrations. Ground surveys look for architectural symmetry. If a prior civilization used biodegradable materials, earthworks, or unfamiliar composites, detection tools might not register them as significant. The deep ocean illustrates this limitation clearly. Vast portions of the seafloor remain unmapped in high resolution. Submerged continental shelves, once exposed during lower sea levels, are among the least explored regions. These shelves would have been ideal for human settlement. Any archaeology there lies buried under sediment, beyond easy reach. Even when evidence exists, access can prevent discovery. Modern cities cover ancient ones. Sacred sites restrict excavation. Political borders limit research. Economic constraints determine priorities. Entire layers of history remain sealed beneath contemporary life. Interpretive frameworks change over time. Sites once dismissed can later become central. Göbekli Tepe was long regarded as insignificant rubble. Only when excavation revealed its age and complexity did its importance become clear. Recognition required abandoning the assumption that monumental architecture must follow agriculture. This suggests that unknown chapters of human history may remain unseen not because evidence is absent, but because frameworks are incomplete. Science advances through revision, yet revision depends on accumulation. Without enough anomalies, models remain stable. The absence of evidence is often treated as evidence of absence. This is practical for drawing conclusions, but it does not describe reality. It defines the limits of what can be claimed, not the limits of what may have existed. If humanity inherited Earth from a previous civilization, detection would be unlikely unless unmistakable markers survived. Over deep time, such markers are rare. Most signals would fall below detection thresholds or outside interpretive categories. The limits of detection do not imply error or concealment, they reflect scale. Human tools are calibrated to short spans of time. Deep time operates beyond intuitive measurement. What lies beyond detection remains unknown by definition. It does not announce itself. It waits for methods, questions, and assumptions that have not yet formed. The record that exists is shaped by survival, discovery, and recognition. Anything that fails one of these steps remains silent. Earth before us. Human presence on Earth extends far beyond the span of recorded history. Fossil evidence places anatomically modern humans at least 300,000 years into the past. Genetic data suggests even earlier branching populations. For most of this time, humans lived without cities, writing, or durable monuments. The absence of these features does not imply absence of impact. It implies a different scale and mode of interaction with the planet. Deep time complicates the idea of a clear beginning. The concept of a starting point for civilization assumes a linear path from simplicity to complexity. Yet human occupation stretches across multiple climate regimes, shifting continents, and repeated environmental reset. The ground beneath modern societies has been inhabited, abandoned, and reoccupied many times. Paleoclimate records show that Earth has not offered stable conditions for long. Ice ages dominate the last 2 million years. Warm interglacials appear briefly, then fade. Each transition alters rainfall, vegetation, coastlines, and available resources. Human groups respond by migrating, adapting, or fragmenting. Long-term continuity is rare. During glacial maxima, sea levels fall dramatically. At the peak of the last ice age, oceans were more than 100 meters lower than today. Continental shelves were exposed, creating vast coastal plains. These areas supported rivers, wetlands, and grasslands. They would have been among the most attractive places for human habitation. Today, they are submerged. As ice melted, these lands disappeared. Any settlements there were abandoned or drowned. The archaeological record of coastal habitation is therefore incomplete by default. What survives represents inland adaptations, not the full picture of human life. The length of human occupation raises another issue. Over hundreds of thousands of years, even rare events become likely. Experiments in social organization, technology, or land use may have occurred and vanished without trace. Short-lived complexity could arise and collapse within time spans invisible to archaeology. Hunter-gatherer societies are often described as static, but evidence suggests variability. Some groups built large, semi-permanent structures. Others managed landscapes through controlled burning, shaping ecosystems over generations. These practices leave subtle traces. Over time, they are absorbed into what appears natural. In Australia, indigenous fire management altered vegetation patterns across entire regions. These practices persisted for tens of thousands of years. When disrupted, landscapes changed rapidly. The prior human influence became invisible within centuries. The land looked untouched, though it was not. Similar patterns are observed in the Americas. Evidence suggests that human activity influenced megafauna populations and vegetation before the end of the last ice age. When large animals went extinct, ecosystems reorganized. Later observers attributed these changes to climate alone, missing the human role. Time also erodes memory. Oral traditions preserve information across generations, but they compress and transform it. Events become symbols. Causes become stories. After enough time, practical detail disappears. What remains is pattern, not explanation. The idea of Earth before us is not about advanced lost cities hidden beneath ice or ocean. It is about duration. Long spans allow for outcomes that short histories cannot capture. They allow for rise and decline without record. They allow for influence without monument. If an earlier civilization existed, it would have faced the same constraints as later ones: climate instability, resource limits, environmental feedback. Collapse would not be extraordinary. It would be expected. Deep time also changes scale of judgment. 10,000 years feels ancient to humans. Geologically, it is brief. A stone structure exposed to weather for that span may survive. A wood and earth city may not. The material choices of a society determine its archaeological visibility. Early human groups likely favored materials that return to the land. Wood, fiber, hide, and earth dominate prehistory. These materials leave faint traces. After millennia, they disappear entirely. Even stone does not guarantee survival. Stone tools scatter, structures collapse. Over time, they resemble scree or bedrock. Without concentration, recognition fails. Human presence also overlaps with other hominin species. Neanderthals, Denisovans, and others occupied parts of the world for hundreds of thousands of years. They used tools, controlled fire, and adapted to varied environments. Their disappearance did not erase their impact entirely. Genetic traces remain. Cultural traces are harder to identify. This overlap suggests that human history is layered even before Homo sapiens became dominant. Multiple lineages experimented with survival strategies. Some may have achieved levels of organization that left little durable trace. The Earth itself does not distinguish between cultural phases. It records pressure, chemistry, and motion. Sediment layers capture floods and fires, not social systems. Ice cores record temperature, not memory. What humans call prehistory is simply history without text. It is not empty. It is densely occupied, but poorly resolved. Each new method sharpens part of the image while leaving others blurred. The further back one looks, the more fragmented the record becomes. This fragmentation is not evidence of simplicity. It is evidence of distance. If humanity inherited Earth, the inheritance would have occurred across this deep backdrop. It would not stand out as a single moment. It would blend into a continuum of occupation, adaptation, and loss. The planet does not reset cleanly. It carries forward altered soils, changed species distributions, modified hydrology. These are long-term signals. They persist even when their origin is forgotten. Earth before us was not empty. It was lived in, shaped, abandoned, reused, over and over. The question is not whether something came before recorded history. It did. The question is how much of it remains detectable, and how much has already passed beyond recognition. Human history begins where evidence allows clarity. Everything before that remains diffuse, scattered across time, folded into the land itself, inheriting the consequences. The present world is often treated as a starting condition. Mountains stand where they stand, rivers flow where they flow, forests grow or fail according to climate. Human activity is measured against this baseline, as if the baseline itself were untouched. Yet the Earth humans inhabit today is not neutral ground. It is the result of accumulated changes, many of them far older than modern memory. Inheritance does not require awareness. A society can live inside the outcome of earlier actions without knowing their origin. Consequences persist even when causes are forgotten. In this way, the planet itself becomes a record of decisions made long before the present generation arrived. Soils provide one of the clearest examples. Productive soil is not guaranteed by climate alone. It develops through long interaction between vegetation, microorganisms, water, and disturbance. In many regions, soil fertility reflects ancient land use rather than natural balance. The dark earths of the Amazon, known as terra preta, contain charcoal, bone, and organic waste deliberately mixed into poor tropical soil. These soils remained fertile centuries after their creators disappeared. The people who made terra preta altered their environment in a lasting way. Later populations farmed these areas without knowing how or why the soil behaved differently. The benefit was inherited. The method was not. Irrigation systems create similar legacies. In Mesopotamia, repeated irrigation without proper drainage caused salt to accumulate in the soil. Crop yields declined over centuries. By the time written records describe agricultural failure, the process was already advanced. Later societies inherited depleted land. They adapted by changing crops or relocating, not by reversing the underlying cause. Forests also carry inherited consequences. Deforestation alters rainfall patterns, erosion rates, and river behavior. In parts of the Mediterranean, ancient deforestation contributed to long-term aridity and soil loss. The modern landscape reflects these ancient changes. Hillsides that appear naturally barren were once wooded. Species distributions tell the same story. Human activity has moved plants and animals across continents for thousands of years. Some species that appear native may be introductions from deep antiquity. Others vanished due to overhunting or habitat change long before written records. Megafaunal extinctions at the end of the last ice age reshaped ecosystems globally. Large herbivores influenced vegetation structure, seed dispersal, and fire regimes. Their disappearance altered landscapes in ways that persist. Later, human societies inherited ecosystems already transformed. Water systems show long memory. Rivers remember past engineering. Channels cut or redirected centuries ago influence flood behavior today. In some regions, modern flood risk is shaped by ancient levees, canals, and embankments now buried beneath sediment. Climate feedbacks amplify inheritance. Land use affects albedo, carbon storage, and atmospheric composition. Over long spans, these effects accumulate. Small changes repeated over millennia can shift regional climates. Later societies experience the result as natural variation. The concept of inheritance also applies to limits. Resource exhaustion is rarely immediate. Mines are depleted gradually. Forests thin over generations. By the time scarcity is felt, extraction has already peaked. Later societies face constraints without seeing the full history of use. This pattern complicates interpretation. When a civilization encounters poor soil, unstable rivers, or limited biodiversity, these conditions are often attributed to nature. Yet they may reflect long chains of human influence, extending far beyond recorded history. If an earlier civilization existed, its most enduring legacy would not be monuments or machines. It would be altered systems, changed baselines, landscapes tuned away from equilibrium. These consequences would not appear as signs of advancement. They would appear as problems, degradation, limits. Later societies would struggle with conditions shaped by predecessors they never knew. Modern humanity already experiences this within recorded history. Industrial pollution persists. Climate change reflects accumulated emissions. Species loss reduces resilience. The future will inherit these outcomes regardless of intention. Project this pattern backward across deep time. A prior civilization, even one less technologically intense, could leave lasting marks simply through scale and duration. Repeated land clearing, persistent burning, large populations altering hydrology, over tens of thousands of years, even low-intensity activity reshapes environments. The difficulty lies in attribution. Without records, effects are detached from causes. The land appears to behave poorly on its own. Human agency disappears from the explanation. Inheritance also affects cultural responses. Societies develop beliefs and practices suited to inherited conditions. Rituals emerge around unreliable rains. Laws arise to manage scarce resources. These adaptations feel timeless, yet they respond to altered baselines. The concept of a pristine Earth before modern humans is increasingly questioned. Evidence suggests widespread human influence long before industrialization. Fire regimes, species distributions, and even atmospheric composition show traces of ancient activity. This does not require a lost global empire. It requires continuity, long presence, repeated interaction. Small actions multiplied across time. If humanity inherited Earth, the inheritance would be uneven. Some regions would carry heavy legacies. Others would remain closer to baseline. Detection would be difficult because the outcome would resemble natural variation. The Earth does not label consequences. It integrates them. Later observers see only the integrated result. Understanding inheritance shifts perspective. It reframes human history as cumulative rather than episodic. Each generation inherits not just land, but altered processes. The silence of the past does not mean inactivity. It means the activity has blended into the background. If something came before, its presence may be felt most strongly in constraints rather than capabilities, in limits rather than achievements. The world humans occupy today may be less a blank stage and more a long-used surface, worn smooth by lives that left no names. The question that remains: every investigation reaches a point where evidence no longer accumulates in the same way. The remaining space is not empty, but unresolved. It is shaped by absence, ambiguity, and limits rather than discoveries. The question of whether humanity inherited Earth from a previous civilization occupies this space. Archaeology can describe what is found. It can outline timelines based on surviving material. It can test hypotheses against physical remains. What it cannot do is fully reconstruct what left little trace. The record is incomplete by nature. This incompleteness is not an error. It is a condition. Human history, as formally studied, rests on a narrow slice of time. Writing spans roughly 5,000 years. Monumental architecture extends perhaps another few thousand. Beyond that, the picture becomes fragmentary. Stone tools persist. Bones scatter. Settlements dissolve into soil stains. The farther back one looks, the thinner the resolution becomes. The idea of inheritance persists because this thinning does not occur smoothly. There are abrupt transitions, moments where complexity appears suddenly, moments where it disappears just as quickly. These discontinuities invite questions not because they are mysterious, but because they resist simple explanation. One approach assumes continuity must exist even when evidence is missing. Another assumes absence until proven otherwise. Both positions reflect methodological choices rather than definitive conclusions. The past itself does not argue. The question remains because multiple explanations fit the same evidence. Sudden architectural skill may result from convergence rather than inheritance. Loss of knowledge may result from local collapse rather than global reset. Environmental change may explain abandonment without invoking prior civilizations. Each explanation is plausible within certain bounds. What complicates resolution is that these explanations are not mutually exclusive. Human history likely includes convergence, collapse, rediscovery, and loss operating simultaneously across regions. This makes singular narratives difficult to sustain. The inheritance question is often misunderstood as a claim of advanced technology hidden beneath the surface. This framing narrows the discussion unnecessarily. Inheritance does not require machines, electricity, or global empires. It requires only prior human activity significant enough to alter trajectories, then fade. The simplest form of inheritance is constraint. A later society inherits soil conditions shaped by earlier use. It inherits species distributions altered by long-term hunting or management. It inherits coastlines reshaped by cumulative settlement and abandonment. These influences do not announce their origin. Another form of inheritance is selective knowledge. Techniques passed through practice rather than explanation. Skills preserved in ritual. Geometry remembered without theory. Navigation retained through song. These forms do not resemble modern science, yet they can be precise and durable. The absence of written continuity does not negate transmission. Oral systems can preserve information for thousands of years under stable conditions. When disrupted, they collapse quickly. This creates sharp boundaries between what is remembered and what is lost. The record shows that collapse often removes explanation before removing practice. The function survives. The reason fades. Over time, even function becomes symbolic. At that point, interpretation replaces knowledge. This pattern does not point conclusively to a lost civilization. It does demonstrate that civilization does not need to be singular or continuous. It can exist in fragments. It can rise and fall repeatedly without leaving a single clear signature. The Earth itself complicates certainty. Geological processes do not respect cultural timelines. Floods, ice, and tectonics remove evidence unevenly. Some regions preserve deeply, others erase almost completely. Global conclusions based on local preservation are therefore unstable. The question remains partly because modern humans expect beginnings to be identifiable. There is comfort in clear origins. They allow narratives to settle. Yet the deeper the timeline extends, the less distinct beginnings become. Human presence stretches back hundreds of thousands of years. During that time, climate oscillated dramatically. Sea levels rose and fell. Entire habitable regions appeared and vanished. Under these conditions, continuity would be rare. It is reasonable to assume that most human activity before the Holocene left no durable trace. It is also reasonable to assume that some activity did. The difficulty lies in distinguishing between them. Scientific caution favors minimal claims. This is appropriate. The inheritance question persists, not because evidence demands it, but because evidence does not eliminate it. There is also a psychological dimension. Humans tend to measure progress by visible accumulation. When early societies appear suddenly capable, it challenges expectations. When knowledge disappears, it challenges assumptions of linear advancement. History teaches that loss is common. Entire libraries vanish. Languages die. Techniques are forgotten. The disappearance of knowledge within recorded history makes its disappearance in deep time unsurprising. What remains uncertain is scale. How much was lost? How often did complexity arise? Did it ever reach levels comparable to later civilizations, or did it remain limited and local? Current evidence cannot answer these questions definitively. It can constrain them. It can suggest probabilities. It cannot close the case. The question remains because it does not require extraordinary assumptions. It requires only that humans behaved as they are known to behave, over a long enough span, under unstable conditions. It also remains because new methods continue to revise old conclusions. Discoveries once thought impossible become accepted. Sites once dismissed gain importance. This pattern encourages restraint rather than certainty. The inheritance idea does not ask for belief. It asks for acknowledgement of limits. It occupies the space between dismissal and assertion. In that space, the past remains open, not as fantasy, but as an incomplete record shaped by survival, detection, and interpretation. The Earth does not confirm or deny inheritance. It holds outcomes, not intentions. Humans infer backwards from what remains. The question remains because there is no final layer to excavate, no last document to translate, no definitive boundary where uncertainty ends. History fades gradually, not cleanly. What survives does so unevenly. What is lost leaves no marker. In this sense, the question is not about what existed, but about how certainty is constructed. It reveals the difference between evidence and absence. The past is larger than the record. This does not make it unknowable, it makes it partial. The question remains because partial knowledge invites caution, not closure. Living on a palimpsest. A palimpsest is a surface written on, erased, and written on again. Traces of earlier writing remain faintly visible beneath newer marks. The term is often applied to manuscripts, but it describes the earth with equal accuracy. Human presence accumulates in layers. Each generation alters the surface, then fades. What follows builds atop what remains, rarely aware of what lies beneath. Cities offer the clearest illustration. Modern streets follow ancient paths. Foundations rest on older walls. Beneath asphalt and concrete lie centuries of debris, compacted into strata. In places like Rome, Jerusalem, and Istanbul, excavation reveals stacked histories separated by thin bands of soil and ash. Each layer represents a moment when life paused, shifted, or ended before resuming above. This layering is not limited to cities. Agricultural land carries memory as well. Fields ploughed for generations develop distinct soil horizons. Irrigation channels leave subtle depressions long after they dry. Terraces built to control erosion-shaped slopes centuries later. Even when abandoned, the land retains form. Forests are also layered. Tree species composition reflects past clearing, burning, and regrowth. In parts of Europe, ancient woodland boundaries correspond to medieval land divisions. What appears wild is often managed by forgotten hands. The absence of fences does not imply absence of planning. Living on a palimpsest means inheriting structure without context. A river bends where it does, because it was once redirected. A hill rises because it is debris from long habitation. A barren patch persists because soil was exhausted generations ago. These conditions feel natural to those who arrive later. The original cause is invisible. Human societies respond to inherited landscapes as if they were given. Beliefs form around them, myths explain them, laws adapt to them. Over time, the explanation becomes permanent while the cause disappears. The land becomes destiny. This process repeats at every scale. A house is built on a foundation. When it collapses, another is raised. Materials are reused. Stones are turned. Wood is repurposed. The new structure carries fragments of the old. Meaning changes, function shifts, continuity remains. On longer timescales, entire civilizations function this way. The Maya built temples over earlier temples. Egyptian pharaohs dismantled older monuments to build new ones. Roman builders stripped Greek structures. Medieval towns cannibalized Roman cities. Each act erased and preserved at the same time. Living on a palimpsest means history is never fully removed. It is compressed. It becomes background. Only when disturbed does it reappear. This has consequences for interpretation. Archaeology reveals fragments, not wholes. A wall without context can be misdated. A tool without lineage can be misclassified. Layers blur. The deeper one digs, the less distinct categories become. The palimpsest also complicates ideas of progress. Development appears uneven because it is built atop uneven remains. A later society may appear advanced because it inherits favorable conditions. Another may appear primitive because it inherits degraded land. Inheritance is not equal. Some regions accumulate advantage. Others accumulate constraint. Over time, this shapes migration, conflict, and adaptation. These outcomes are attributed to culture or environment, rarely to long-forgotten actions. Living on a palimpsest also means contributing to it. Every road alters drainage. Every settlement changes soil chemistry. Every fire reshapes ecosystems. These changes persist beyond intention. Future generations inherit them without consent. Modern humanity is actively rewriting the surface at an unprecedented scale. Urbanization, deforestation, mining, and climate change inscribe new layers rapidly. The speed of change compresses memory even further. What is altered today may be unrecognizable within centuries. This raises a mirror. If future archaeologists examine the remains of the present, what will they see? Fragmented materials, altered sediments, chemical signatures. They may misinterpret causes. They may miss context. They may argue about intention. The same uncertainty applies to the past. Living on a palimpsest means certainty is always provisional. The surface hides as much as it reveals. The idea of Earth as inherited does not require a single lost civilization. It emerges naturally from layered occupation. Each generation inherits not only land, but consequences of prior layers. Over enough time, these layers become indistinguishable from nature. This does not diminish human agency, it expands it across time. Actions echo beyond memory. Influence persists without recognition. The palimpsest metaphor also reframes responsibility. If the present is shaped by the past, then the future will be shaped by the present. The erasure of context does not erase impact. Living on a palimpsest means accepting uncertainty. It means acknowledging that what appears natural may be artificial, and what appears ancient may be recent. It means understanding that absence of evidence is often absence of visibility, not absence of action. The earth does not preserve intention, it preserves outcome. Humans interpret backward from result to cause, filling gaps with assumption. Every excavation is a negotiation with this layered reality. Dig too shallow and history seems simple. Dig deeper and it fragments. Dig deeper still and categories dissolve. The palimpsest does not offer closure. It offers continuity without clarity. It resists clean narratives. It rewards restraint. If humanity inherited Earth, it did so not as heirs receiving a sealed legacy, but as occupants stepping onto a surface already written on many times. The writing beneath influenced every step, even when unreadable. Living on a palimpsest means history is never finished. It is overwritten, not erased. The faint traces remain, shaping what comes next. What future layers will make of the present remains unknown. They will inherit outcomes, not explanations. They will interpret fragments. They will debate origins. They will stand where others once stood, on ground shaped by lives they cannot name, and they will call it the beginning. After the inheritance, every civilization reaches a moment when it stops acting upon the world and begins to sink into it. Decisions that once moved forward through planning and intention slow, fragment, and finally settle into the ground. What survives is not purpose, but consequence. The future does not receive strategies or explanations. It receives conditions already shaped. When modern societies think about permanence, attention often turns toward visible achievements. Monuments are reinforced, records are archived, technology is replicated and backed up. These efforts assume that endurance lies in preservation, yet the historical record suggests otherwise. Libraries are burned or neglected, digital systems fail silently, buildings collapse or are dismantled. What persists longest is not what was meant to last, but what altered the environment around it. Landscapes changed by human action endure long after memory fades. Forests cleared centuries ago may never fully return. Rivers redirected for irrigation may continue to flood unpredictably. Soil exhausted by repeated use may remain infertile long after the people who worked it are forgotten. These outcomes do not announce their origin. They appear as natural features to those who arrive later. If future observers exist, they will not encounter the present as it understands itself. They will not find nations preserved in recognizable form. They will not uncover intact ideologies or economic systems. What they will encounter are layers. Sediments infused with unfamiliar compounds, plastic fragments embedded in rock, sudden shifts in atmospheric chemistry preserved in ice cores or mineral deposits, abrupt changes in biodiversity marked by extinction lines. These traces will be mute. They will not explain intention or context. Interpretation will depend on the assumptions held by those who study these remnants. A society that believes in steady progress may see the present era as a brief anomaly, a sharp spike of activity followed by contraction. A society that expects repetition may place it within a long pattern of expansion and decline. Meaning will emerge not only from evidence, but from the frameworks used to interpret it. This is already visible in how the present reconstructs the past. Early chapters of human history are pieced together from scattered remains. Stone tools, bone fragments, faint settlement traces. Gaps are approached cautiously. Narratives are shaped by what can be supported. What does not fit existing models is often set aside. What aligns is emphasized. Silence is treated as absence, even when it may only be loss. The concept of inheritance reframes this approach. It suggests that continuity does not depend on recognition. A civilization does not need to be remembered to exert influence. Its most powerful effects may occur after it disappears, through the conditions it leaves behind. These effects persist whether or not they are understood. Seen this way, the boundary between natural and artificial becomes unstable. Once human influence reaches sufficient scale or duration, it blends into the baseline. Later societies treat altered environments as given. Rivers behave as they behave. Soils yield or fail as they do. The original causes no longer matter to daily survival. They slip beyond relevance. This dynamic applies across systems. Climate patterns can be shaped by long-term land use and atmospheric change. Ecologies can be restructured by species removal or introduction. Geography itself can be subtly altered through erosion, sedimentation, and water control. Over time, these changes become normalized. The land is assumed to have always been this way. Future populations may inherit such altered systems without knowing their origin. They will develop customs, beliefs, and technologies to cope with them. These adaptations will feel ancient and appropriate, even if the conditions they address are relatively recent in deep time. The response will outlive the cause. The present already operates within this pattern. Modern societies manage environments shaped by centuries of prior activity. Many contemporary problems resist resolution because their origins are deeply embedded. Solutions focus on managing outcomes rather than undoing causes. Restoration is often impossible. Mitigation becomes the only option. This reality suggests that humility is not a moral preference, but a structural necessity. No civilization fully understands the depth of the ground it occupies. No generation can observe the complete arc of its influence. Effects extend beyond foresight. Consequences accumulate silently. The end of an age rarely arrives with clarity. It is not marked by a single event or decision. It emerges through accumulation. Infrastructure degrades. Systems become harder to maintain. Knowledge narrows as specialization collapses. Complexity loses resilience. What follows is not disappearance, but thinning. Less coordination, less reach, less memory. Within this thinning, what survives is what can function under constraint. Simple tools endure. Local practices persist. Knowledge that can be taught through use remains. Systems that depend on scale, surplus, or constant maintenance fade first. This survival pattern is often misread. Future observers may interpret the remains of a collapsed society as evidence of simplicity rather than loss. They may assume earlier populations never achieved complexity. The absence of durable structures will reinforce that view. This interpretation will not be malicious. It will be reasonable given the evidence available. Such misreading does not invalidate the past. It situates it. It reflects the same limitations faced by every generation attempting to understand what came before. If humanity inherited Earth from earlier civilizations, it likely did so without awareness. There would have been no deliberate transfer, no preserved instruction. The inheritance would have been environmental rather than informational. Altered baselines would arrive without explanation. Later societies would adapt without knowing what they were adapting to. The same pattern will apply to the future. The present will be inherited without understanding. Altered climates, depleted resources, changed ecologies will be taken as starting conditions. Myths will encode partial truths. Archaeology will debate anomalies. Some explanations will fit. Others will remain unresolved. The Earth itself will remain indifferent. It will continue cycling material. It will erode detail and preserve fragments according to chance and chemistry. It will not distinguish between intention and accident. This perspective does not require certainty about what came before. It does not rely on hidden continents or vanished global empires. It rests on time, repetition, and loss. On the observation that complex systems leave uneven traces, and that most activity fades beyond recognition. The question of inheritance persists because it matches how systems behave. It aligns with what is known about collapse, erosion, and memory. It fits the structure of evidence and silence without demanding conclusions that cannot be supported. In this sense, the Earth is not a narrative with a clear beginning. It is a surface written on repeatedly. Each layer compresses the one below. Each erasure leaves residue rather than emptiness. Civilizations do not conclude neatly. They blur into what follows. Their most lasting legacy is often invisible, embedded in constraints rather than achievements. What remains shapes possibility more than memory. To stand on Earth is to stand on outcomes shaped by countless lives. Most left no names. Most left no records. Their presence is felt not through stories, but through limits and affordances, through what can be done and what cannot. The inheritance is quiet. It offers no explanation. It does not announce its origin. It is encountered through experience rather than knowledge. Future generations will pose their own versions of these questions. They will search for beginnings. They will debate continuity. They will confront gaps in the record. They will inherit uncertainty alongside land. And that quiet uncertainty, carried forward without resolution, may be the most consistent feature of human history. If the Earth is a palimpsest, then the present is only one layer among many. What came before is mostly silent, and what comes after will inherit outcomes rather than explanations. History, seen this way, is not a straight line, but a surface rewritten again and again, each age believing it stands at the beginning. The question of inheritance does not demand belief. It asks for restraint. It reminds us that absence is not emptiness, and silence is not proof. What survives shapes what can be known. Everything else dissolves into background. If this perspective changed how you think about history, consider continuing the journey. Subscribe for future chapters where we explore forgotten transitions, lost time, and the quiet mechanics of civilization. And if you choose to leave a comment, leave a question, not an answer. History rarely offers those.